Hi friends, welcome to another video. In this video, we are going to talk about Azure File Sync. In some cases, you might see the service name called as Storage Sync as well. If you see that in the documentation, it basically means this service only. So what exactly is a file sync service? So this file sync service enables you to centrally store your file shares in Azure Files. Azure Files is nothing but it is a part of storage account. So you create a storage account, and within a storage account, you have a service called Azure Files where you can store all of your files. Now it provides you flexibility, performance, and compatibility very similar to what you get on a Windows file server. So if you have deployed file server in the past, there is a lot of management overhead that you have. But if you leverage Azure File Service, that management overhead is taken care by Microsoft. So some users can keep their local copy or data locally, but if they want, they can always sync their data to cloud, and they can get some additional functionalities besides what they're getting on a Windows server. So you may keep only the caches of your data on premises in your servers. All of the data that you maybe want to back up, you can store it on a file share. You can use any protocol which is available on your Windows server to store your data locally, including SMB, NFS, and FTPS. If you want to improve the security, you also have the opportunity to use private endpoint and service endpoint, which can help you to secure your connections to Azure Files. Now you can have these caches which may be available all over the globe as well. So you can have your file sync service installed on multiple servers, and you can connect from those multiple servers into this one central place. So if you see over here, this diagram actually shows you that multiple cache option available to you. Let's say you have your servers all over the globe. So some are in Delhi, some are in Mexico City, others are in New York, and then you have some servers in Japan. What you can do, you can install the file sync agent on all of these Windows servers, and it can start replicating your files into Azure Files over here. And once you have everything in Azure Files, you can basically do a backup of this data. You can also configure tiering, and there are a lot of other benefits that you can go for when you have your data in Azure Files. Some of the benefits that you can get with this file sync services, let's look at that. One of the benefits that you get with this is cloud tiering. So whatever data is most frequently accessed by your Windows servers, that can be kept locally on your server, whereas any data which is less frequently accessed can be moved into a cold tier. So it supports this tiering functionality where all the hot data which is frequently accessed can be there on your Windows server. Any data that you want to offload to cloud, that can also be done automatically. So this is supported in this. You have multiple site access and sync. So multiple sites can get connected to Azure File Sync, and you can have that sync running continuously. So if you update one folder at one place on one server, that folder can also be updated at a different place. For example, if you see in this diagram, if some folder is updated in New Delhi server, this server will sync to file sync, and this server will also be updated for your New York office available to you over here. So any files or updates that you're making, all those updates are also synced back to your Azure files over here. You also have business continuity and disaster recovery options available to you. So it is backed by Azure Files, which is again a managed service available to you. And it provides you all the similar redundancy options that you get with a file service. Okay, so it can give you like a backup option. If you don't want to keep the data for too long, you can always delete the data. And it can also act as a disaster recovery scenario for you. In case, let's say your server goes down, what you do, you basically sync the namespaces, and after you have completed the sync of namespaces, it allows you to get the content over there. So you just sync the namespaces on your on-premises server, and you don't necessarily need to sync all the content from Azure Files back to your server. So you get those namespaces, you click on the namespaces, and then if you want, you can just get that data back on your on-premises cache as well. It also supports clustering. So if you have clustered servers, you can always also connect those clustered servers as well to this Azure File Sync service. Also, you have cloud side backup option available to you. By default, Azure File supports snapshot capabilities. So you can always take a snapshot and that snapshot can be kept for backup purposes. You can either take a manual snapshot on Azure files, or you can automate it by using Azure Backup. So you configure certain policies, and using those policies, your data is continuously backed up for you. Now, in order to see this in action, how this service actually works, you can see this diagram over here. If you understand this diagram, it means you understand storage sync service or Azure file sync service well. So you have to follow a few steps in order for you to create or work with this service. So the first step that one needs to follow is you have to create a service called as storage sync service. So the first step for you is going to be you create a storage sync service in cloud. Once you have created this storage sync service, the second step for you will be to create a sync group. So you create a storage sync service. After that, you create a sync group. After you've created a sync group, you basically define a cloud endpoint. So third step is going to be cloud endpoint. So you define a cloud endpoint, which is nothing but a file share. So step one, you create a storage sync service. Step two, you create a sync group. Step three is you define a cloud endpoint, which is nothing but a file share on a storage account. Step four is going to be you register your server. How do you register your on-premises server? You basically install the file sync agent. You install the file sync agent, and using that agent, your server is registered for you. Once you have registered your server, then you define on-premises endpoint. That is step number 5. On-premises endpoint is nothing but it is a part to a folder where you'll keep your data. So similarly, you can create different sync groups. So first sync group may be for your Delhi servers. Similarly, I can create one more for my New York servers, one more for my Japan servers. So I can create multiple sync groups, and all these sync groups can keep my data in sync with all of the servers that I've deployed on premises. So this is the overall architecture that you see. Now let's look at this from a demo perspective. So if I go to the Azure portal, over here you can see quite a few VMs I've deployed. There are two VMs that I want to focus on. There's a server called Web App VM1. In this server, I have already installed the file sync agent. Now, if I want to install the file sync agent on this VM, we'll look at how you can basically go about installing that. I'm already RDP'd into these servers. So this is my Web App VM1 server, and the other server is VM1 server. So we are going to look at the differences between these servers before and after you install the agent. Now, the first step, if you remember, what we need to do, we need to create a storage sync service. How do you go about creating a storage sync service? You just search for storage sync service. After that, you go to create. And over here, you define the resource group where you want to deploy it. Maybe this is my resource group. You define a name of your storage sync service. Storage sync service, maybe 09. You will define a proper name. I'm just defining a random name over here. You select where your workloads are located. So if most of my workloads are part of, let's say, East US, I'll go for that. So let's say if I go to East US, let's say most of my workloads are located in that specific location. Then you define networking setting. Do you want to allow access to this file sync service over the internet or on all networks, or you define private endpoint and you want to only connect over certain private endpoints. Then you click on review and create, and this file sync service is created for you. Once you have this storage sync service or file sync service created for you, you then go to next step, which is creation of a sync group. So that is step number 2. So let's say if I'm creating a sync group, the sync group name will be New York sync group. Okay, so I'm creating a sync group for New York. I'm defining my subscription, and I'm also selecting a storage account where I'm going to keep my data. For example, let's say this is the storage account I'm selecting, and within a storage account, you require a cloud endpoint. My cloud endpoint is going to be my file share. So let's say I'm going with file share 02. So I have my cloud endpoint set up now. Once you click on create, this is going to create the sync group for you. So this is step number 2. So if you go back to the diagram, we have created a storage sync service. We have created a sync group. Now step 3 is going to be you create a storage account and a file share, which I have already done. So if you see, I have a storage account, which is storage account ST endpoint, and within that storage account, I have a file share created called FS2. So you just create a storage account and you create a file share like this, FS, let's say 03. It has to be small letters, FS04, and you create it. So once you're done with this, your cloud endpoint is ready. Now you go back over here, and once your sync group is ready or it is created, the next step is going to be to register your server. How do you register your server? So next step is going to be, you have created a cloud endpoint. Now I need to register my server. How do I register my server? In order to register your server, you have to go to registered servers over here. And you will see that I've already registered 2 of my servers. In order for me to register these servers, I need to go to this link. And once I go to this link, I can basically download this agent on my machine. So if you see, I've gone to this VM, which is VM1. On this VM, what I've done, I've gone to this link and I've downloaded this agent. After you download this agent, you have to select what server that you're running it on. So if you click on download, you will get multiple options available to you over here. So let me highlight these. So if you see, different agents are required for different versions of your Windows Server. So if you're using Windows Server 2012, a different agent will be required. For 2019, 2016, and 2022, there are different agents available. So make sure you download the correct agent on your server. Once you've downloaded this file sync agent on your server, you'll see that you'll get the option to run it. Just like you run any program of Windows, you just run it. And once you have run it, you basically go through this setup of your file sync. You agree to the end user license. You go to the path where you want to store it. You go to the next where it talks about proxy settings. If you're using proxy on your environment, you will also add those proxy details over here. Then you click on next. And do you want to use Microsoft Update to update this storage sync agent? If you want to do that, you will just click on next and you'll click on install. Once you're done installing it, you're going to get an option to register this server. So you have to provide your email address. It has to be a work account. You have to provide your subscription name and you have to provide your storage account where you want to copy this data over. So you have to define all of those details over here. Once you're done installing the agent on your server and done registering this agent, that server will show up over here. Now I can go back to my sync group. So you can see you registered this server. After you registered it, you basically have this server visible to you under registered servers over here. So for example, I've already installed it on this server and it is currently online. Now you go back to your sync group, whatever sync group you have created. For example, I had created this New York sync group. And on this New York sync group, my cloud endpoint is already there, which is nothing but a file share that I had created. Now what I can do, I can also add a server endpoint over here. What is this server endpoint? This is nothing but my on-premises agent or the server where I've added my agent. So I click on add server endpoint and over here I'll select my registered server. So I only see 2 now. You select your server and you define a path that you want to sync. So if I want to sync, let's say D drive, I'll define a specific path within my D drive where I'll want to sync the files to Azure files. You can also configure cloud tiering over here, and I can also configure initial settings or initial sync settings as part of my server endpoint. So once you configure all of this, if you click on create, a server endpoint creation will be done for you. Once this is done, all of the data from that D drive will start syncing into my Azure files. So that's how you basically define your cloud endpoint and your server endpoint. Similarly, I can add multiple servers and I can configure multiple server endpoints based on my requirement. And all of those endpoints can send data to the same file share that we have looked at. Once this configuration is complete, if you go back to your files, for example, I've already done this for FS01. On this FN01, what you will see, you'll see whatever data you have on premises, that data will also be synced back over here. So I have some on premises text that I have added over here, which is synced to cloud as well. That's all about Azure File Sync service. I'll see you in the next video.